It's time now for a look at what's been making headlines here over the past 7 days in A Week in France. French President Emmanuel Macron has vowed to replant the historic Fontainebleau forest after wildfires scorched at least 10% of the 20,000-hectare domain. Officials say the blaze has now been contained, but it warned it could be weeks before it's completely extinguished. Investigators believe the fire was set deliberately, and several people are in custody, including a volunteer firefighter. Macron, who visited the forest on Friday, pledged a zero-tolerance policy for arson in the wake of the devastation. Several fundraisers have been launched to help the forests that have been ravaged by wildfires this summer season in France. One of them has already raised €121,000 in just a week. Our colleagues at France 2 have this report.
Since the beginning of the summer, fires have ravaged numerous French forests. Fontainebleau outside of Paris, but also in the Eastern Pyrenees and in Burgundy. More than 32,000 hectares have already burned. In less than a week, more than 1,000 people donated more than €120,000 to different fundraisers. Among them is this family.
Come on, let's go and see what's happening in the forest.
They live right next to the Saint-Germain-en-Laye forest.
Don't make any noise or it will run away.
When the fundraisers launched, they didn't hesitate for a second.
I gave €50 to help the forest. It's only a small drop in the ocean, I think, compared with what the forest needs right now. It would need much more.
If the place where the roadie lives burns, its home is going to be destroyed.
80 kilometers away, in the Fontainebleau forest, the flames were devastating. Even though the fires are now under control, 10% of the forest has been completely burned. A fundraising campaign has been launched, and in town, the disaster is on everyone's mind.
I would absolutely be willing to donate, just as I would for a historic monument. It is a 1,000-year-old heritage and it must be preserved.
I would be ready to donate, but above all I expect the state to take the necessary measures so that we adapt and anticipate what is coming.
For the organizers of the campaign, every donation matters.
With the National Forest Office and all the experts who work on forests, we're going to finance research. That means we will be taking soil samples, checking whether water is still filtering through the soil or not. Then we will be able to move on to solutions like replanting trees or the forest's natural regeneration.
Despite the solidarity, it will take several decades for the forest to regenerate.
On Wednesday, French lawmakers approved a bill that will create a legal right to assisted dying for adults with incurable illnesses. The issue has been championed by President Emmanuel Macron, but has been highly contentious politically, as well as drawing opposition from the Catholic Church and parts of the medical profession. Still, opinion polls suggest that a large majority of the French population supports assisted dying. Laurent Berstecker has more.
For the fourth time in just over a year, France's National Assembly voted on a controversial assisted dying bill, and just like in the 3 previous readings, the text was approved by a large majority.
The vote is closed. 366 in favor, 182 against. The National Assembly approves the bill.
The vote signals the end of years of political, legal, and moral wrangling over a bill championed by President Emmanuel Macron. The law, which would enable patients suffering from incurable and life-threatening illnesses to request lethal medication under strict medical supervision, was repeatedly shut down by the conservative-dominated Senate. Critics argued the measure would encourage patients to end their lives instead of seeking palliative care, but those backing the law repeatedly pointed to the strict criteria and safeguards, making sure lethal measures are only used as a last resort.
We're talking about severe untreatable diseases, with patients in critical condition, in an advanced or terminal phase. So we have quite restrictive criteria. We would be one of the most restrictive countries that have legalized assisted dying.
Given the final say under French law, the National Assembly's vote has put an end to the debate. The text will now be presented to the Constitutional Court, which has up to a month to approve it before going into force.
For more on this, we can now bring in Paul Smith, head of modern languages at the University of Nottingham and associate professor in French and Francophone Studies. Paul, thanks so much for joining us on the program today. So we know that President Macron had promised this legislation when he was reelected. Now, it's taken more than 3 years to get passed. What caused the delay? Was it divisions in Parliament?
Yes, partly. As you say, Macron promised the legislation, but this wasn't actually a government bill. Technically speaking, it's a private member's bill, what the French call a proposition rather than a projet de loi. And Macron and a succession of governments, in fact, preferred to allow the National Assembly, not so much the Senate, as we heard in the report, they've systematically rejected what's been proposed, but to allow deputies in the National Assembly to develop the law themselves so that it would then be seen as more of a, if you like, a public bill, something that reflects the opinions of the French people. And then it was finally voted on for the fourth time in its final iteration on Wednesday, and so that's why it's taken so long. And of course, it's an important debate, and I think that there was a sense that one wanted to get it right. And then it will go, again, as your report suggested, it will go to the Constitutional Council. There are a number of objections from the Senate. The Speaker of the Senate is one of those who's asked for the Constitutional Council to rule, but also the Prime Minister, Sébastien Lecornu, wants the Constitutional Council to just check the law to make sure that it is comfortable as well with those conditions. So that's the reason why it's taken such a long time. It's important legislation, it's controversial legislation, and there's a sense that of wanting to get it right.
Now, Paul, as you mentioned there, it's not officially law yet because the Constitutional Council does need to check some of that text. Could they declare it invalid? Is that likely?
It seems possible that there is a possibility that they would say that there are certain aspects of the law that they would like to be thought over, reflected on again. Gérard Larcher, the Speaker of the Senate, for example, has expressed a particular concern over the period. There's a 15-day period where a medical professional brings together various experts, people who are connected to each individual case, and discusses the situation. And then there is a decision that's taken. And once that decision is taken, there's then a 48-hour period where the actual process takes place. There's a final decision by the actual patient themselves. And Larcher is concerned that that's not long enough, that period of reflection after the decision by this college, if you like, of medics headed by the principal doctor. Once they've made their decision, his feeling is that that's not long enough. And so there are some concerns. It may well be that the Constitutional Council comes back and says, we don't think that's long enough. We think there are things that need to be improved, changed, amended, but it's unlikely the Constitutional Council would throw the whole bill out as a block, as it were. So there might be some modifications, but I don't think that there would be the whole piece of legislation being rejected.
And now, Paul, this is all happening, of course, ahead of an election year. So how is this playing out between the various parties, the right versus the left, or even the far right? How have they been weighing in on this?
Well, it's interesting again because it's been developed by the National Assembly. There's kind of been it's not been a whip. As we would understand in the British system. So what we see is when we look at it, the right generally has voted against the legislation, the left generally in favour. But for example, on the far right, Le Pen, as a deputy, voted against the legislation. But one of her sort of right-hand men, Sébastien Chenoux, he voted for it. There was actually only about 16 National Rally deputies voted for it. Mostly they voted against. Eric Ciotti's far-right bloc, they voted against. Most of Les Républicains voted against. And then when we get to the left, it was kind of, there were small numbers there who voted against the legislation. In the centre, a bit more an even split. So it seems unlikely, it's possible, I suppose, that Le Pen might want to reverse this legislation. She might decide to make it part of her campaign, but that doesn't seem to be among her priorities at this point in time. So I think that once it's there, once the legislation is in place, it will stay there. But it may well be that the experience of the legislation is that it doesn't turn out to be exactly what was expected. So it may well be it may be amended and altered later on. But I think it's not altogether likely. There will be some candidates. I think Bruno Retailleau, for example, would look to reverse the legislation. But I don't think it's going to necessarily be top of the list of priorities. So we might see it being part of the campaign, but I wouldn't anticipate at this point that it would be one of the principal issues.
Now, Paul, we've seen here that this has been a contentious debate. Supporters say there should be a right to die with dignity, and polls do suggest that a majority of French people support that. But of course, there are critics. Who are they, and what have they been saying about this?
Well, absolutely. There are critics. There are the traditional Republican Catholic right. You mentioned again in the report objections from the Vatican. Catholicism is kind of having something of a renaissance as a political kind of entity within France. And there are some people, not so much Le Pen, but certainly I mentioned Bruno Retailleau, kind of repositioning himself as a conservative Catholic candidate. So there's that kind of the if you like, the moral, the ethical objection to assisted dying. There's also been in France, as we've seen in other countries, strong objection from groups representing disabled citizens who fear that it would be a kind of eugenics via the back door, that this will be used, the legislation might be misused, the process will be misused to pressurize certain groups of people, not groups of people, but individuals, into making decisions that superficially appear to be their own decisions, but which aren't. And so there's also, we've seen that in the United Kingdom, for example, that particular aspect of the debate. So and much more a focus, exactly as it says there, care, not do away with, the idea that actually there should be much more of a focus. What the state is not doing enough of is looking after the disabled or people with long-term illnesses, and instead of this kind of what is being interpreted, what is being seen as it's by no means a straightforward decision, but you get the point that this needs to be done.
Yes. Paul, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. It's always a pleasure to have you on the program. That's Paul Smith, head of modern languages at the University of Nottingham, an associate professor in French and Francophone Studies. Now, the Grand Mosque of Paris, the French capital's most famous Muslim place of worship, celebrated its 100th anniversary on Wednesday. Elitsa Gadiva tells us more about its history.
The Grand Mosque of Paris has been part of the capital's Latin Quarter for 100 years, a century of spirituality and dialogue, according to the place of worship. Amid years of tensions between France's religious and secular communities, fueled by wars in the Middle East and the rise of the far right, the rector of the mosque insists that Islam is firmly rooted in France.
This day, beyond simply celebrating monuments, celebrates an idea, an important idea, which is that Islam is fully compatible with French citizenship and with secularism.
As well as catering to the spiritual needs of the faithful, the complex welcomes tourists who want to take in its new Moresque architecture and hosts a restaurant. The first stone was laid in 1922, and the mosque was inaugurated 4 years later by French President Gaston Doumergue. The project gained momentum after the First World War, when hundreds of thousands of Muslims served in France's armed forces and an increasing number settled in Paris. During the occupation of Paris in the Second World War, it became an active place of resistance for the faithful. Several hundred Jews were also secretly sheltered here. Today, the Grand Mosque of Paris has become a symbol of Islam in France, which has one of the largest Muslim populations in the European Union. Throughout the year, the mosque will be organizing numerous exhibitions on Islam to celebrate its anniversary.
France marked its annual Independence Day celebrations over 2 days this year, choosing to host its big fireworks display at the Eiffel Tower on Monday night to commemorate the 10th anniversary of a deadly terrorist attack in Nice. The big military parade, however, went ahead as usual on July 14th. This year's edition showcased military power and unity with European allies, as President Emmanuel Macron welcomed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky along with 24 other heads of state. On display were 6,700 troops, 98 aircraft, 31 helicopters, and 315 vehicles, all following the traditional route between the Arc de Triomphe and the Place de la Concorde in Paris. Tens of thousands of people braved the scorching heat to attend the celebrations.